Assalamu alaikum everybody and welcome back to Change of Heart, this year's Instagram Ramadan series where we focus on realizations, repentance, and renewals of faith. Today's story is about one of the greatest companions in the history of Islam, one of the closest companions to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and somebody whose name is definitely known throughout the entire Ummah, and many of you or your family members may even be named after him. His name is Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, and he was somebody that has such a high status. The Prophet ﷺ described him and said that, if there were to be a prophet after me, and there will be no prophet after me, but he said, if there were to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar. And he said that Shaitan, when he sees that Umar is walking down one street or one path, Shaitan decides to take a detour, a different way. So this person's faith, Umar's faith, is so celebrated and so known. He's a legend in the Islamic tradition, but he wasn't always that way. And his change of heart actually happened in multiple different scenarios. But who he was before Islam was somebody that, again, just like other stories that we've been telling in this series, everybody in the community or in society would have written guidance off from this person. Like, there's no way that somebody who is so deep in the depths of his own desires and nafs will ever come to the light of faith and to come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Umar bin Khattab, he was somebody that was known by his own admission. In a hadith, he tells everybody, he says that I struggled with alcohol, I struggled with women, I struggled with all these vices. And those vices led him to eventually develop a deep hatred for anything that was virtuous and good. And so when the message of Islam came, when the Prophet ﷺ preached and taught Islam in Mecca in the early days, it really bothered Umar, and he didn't like it, and it didn't sit well with him, and he actually started to develop a deep resentment towards the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Now, there were moments and signs, there were some narrations that showed that he wasn't all bad. And I think this is like the first point that I want to take from Umar, is that sometimes we tell the story about like somebody who changed his life and he was all bad and then he became all good. There were actually moments during his life where he showed these flashes of potential. And these moments exist within every one of us. Like, all of us know that we have potential. We know that. But it's a matter of whether or not we're going to take advantage of that before, who knows, it might leave us. So there's one story in which Umar radiallahu anhu, who was famous, by the way, for torturing Muslims. There's one story where he came across a couple that was trying to escape and leave, and they were the victims of his torture at one point. And on their way to escape, the woman of the group, the wife of the group, she bumped into Umar. And he asked her, where are you going? And she just kind of like let loose. She just told him, you make our lives so miserable here. You don't let us live. We're just trying to practice our faith and worship Allah alone, and we're not doing anyone any harm. And we're leaving because of you. People like you are the reason why we're leaving. Like, she just gained the courage to say it right to his face. And in that moment, Umar said back to her, may God be with you on your journey. In a moment when he was being insulted directly to his face, when she was just kind of going at it, letting him have it. In his heart, subhanAllah, he had this moment. And as he left her, she was shocked. Her jaw dropped. And when her husband came back and they were finally about to disembark and leave, she said, you're not going to believe what happened. And she told him the whole story. And she actually said to her husband, I think there might be some goodness in that man. I think Umar might have some goodness in him. And her husband hilariously says back to her, Umar bin Khattab, she said, the donkey of Khattab will convert before Umar does. Like, we're going to see animals worshiping Allah in the masjid before we see Umar worship Allah in the masjid. Like, there's no way, right? So that tells you two things. Number one, just how far gone he was, how much the society and community just kind of gave up on him, and they just kind of knew of him as being an evil person. And then the second thing is, it also shows you that he had that potential within him. So anyways, even though he had those potential moments, definitely the vices and the bad habits, they kind of took over, and he became somebody who developed a deep resentment for Islam and for the Prophet ﷺ. Now, interestingly, his sister accepted Islam, Fatima bint Khattab radiallahu anha, and her husband Sa'id bin Zayd radiallahu anhu. So they accepted Islam in private, and he didn't even know that his sister and his brother-in-law were Muslim. Now, one day, after being egged on by Quraysh, and after kind of being fed up with the message of Islam and what he saw, he misinterpreted and he misunderstood as Islam tearing apart families. He decided that he wanted to go and, he wanted to kill the Prophet ﷺ. He wanted to end his life. He said, this man is the source of all of the problems that we're experiencing in the community. I want to go and end him once and for all. And if you think about it, like this misunderstanding and this misattribution of problems to Islam and to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it's like very early Islamophobia, if you see like how he thought of it. So he leaves his house, and actually the narration says that he left his house with his sword hanging around his neck, which was kind of like, if a person wears a gun on their belt and they purposely show their gun to everybody, or they want to like exhibit this aggression. So he's got his sword around his neck, and he's walking, and there's a person who's also from his tribe, Banu Adi. There's a person, his name is Nu'aym ibn Abdullah. And Nu'aym was also secretly a Muslim, but it wasn't known. And he sees Umar, and he sees this look on his face, and he's just like, man, we know Umar, we know who he is, we know what he's all about. Like, it was known publicly he did not like Islam, didn't like Muslims. And Nu'aym said, this looks like a bad look, like the look on his face is not good. So he asked him, he said to Umar, where are you going? And without even hesitating for a second, Umar responded and he said, I'm going to go get Muhammad. I'm going to go and I'm going to kill him. He has forsaken our religion, our tradition. He has broken the pact of our forefathers. The unity of Quraysh is all gone now. Like, look at what this guy has done. So Nu'aym, he has like a split second kind of little crisis, because he obviously can't admit that he's Muslim, because that means he's going to get it. He's worried because the Prophet ﷺ is in danger. So what does he do? He tells Umar, he says, Umar, you're so angry. It's so clear that you're making this decision out of anger. And he says, this is not a good way to act. Like your anger has blinded you. And he goes, by the way, if you really are upset at Islam and Muslims and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, why don't you go take care of your own family, man? And Umar was like confused. He said, what do you mean by that? My own family? What's wrong with my family? And Nu'aym said, you should go and check on your sister and your brother-in-law, because they have accepted the faith of Muhammad ﷺ. This man you hate so much, they've accepted him. So this anger, Nu'aym thought maybe he was redirecting and he was saving the Prophet ﷺ, which temporarily he was, but he was actually, what he had did was he had inflamed now this anger even more. Because now it's like coming from Umar's own home, his own family, and now on top of anger, there's like confusion and embarrassment and mistrust. And so now he rushes over to the house of his sister Fatima, and they're being taught Quran. Fatima and Sa'id are being taught Quran by this companion named Khattab ibn Arat. Khattab radiallahu anh is a very famous companion, lots of stories about him, but he was a Quran teacher, and he was teaching them from Surah Al-Taha. Surah Taha, which is the 20th chapter of the Quran. And Umar, he walks up to the door and he bangs on the door and he says, let me in. And he hears the Surah Taha, he hears the recitation of the Quran, he hears the melody, the harmony, and so he wasn't let in at first, and then finally he busts open, and Fatima radiallahu anha, she hid the Quran. Khabbab actually jumped in the closet because he was afraid, and he hid as well. And he said, what was going on in here? What were you guys doing? This looks kind of shady. And she said, nothing. What are you talking about? And he said, I heard something, and I know now that you're Muslim, so don't even try to hide this from me. Just like let me know what's going on. So at that moment, when he said, I heard you're Muslim and tell me what you've been doing, Sa'id and Fatima, they just denied it. They said, what are you talking about? Leave us alone. And Umar was so overcome with rage that he jumped on Sa'id and he started to just wail on him, and he started to just beat him up so bad. Fatima radiallahu anha, his wife, she rushed to go help her husband, and in his anger and his chaos, this is a key moment here, Umar swings back and he hits her in the face and he strikes her across the cheek, and he strikes her so hard that she actually starts to bleed. And at that moment, it's said that Umar, he looked at the face of his sister and he saw the blood that was like dripping from her face, and he saw his brother-in-law, on the ground, bruised and beaten. And he looked at himself and he had that change of heart moment, that realization of, what kind of monster have I become? Is this the nobility and the chivalry and the honor that we talk about, that Quraysh talks about? What kind of animal have I become that I'm just attacking my own family? For what? And so he has like this moment and he sees the impact of his sinful way and his lifestyle. And when he sees that, it like cracks his heart open. And he looks at his sister and he says, I'm sorry. And subhanAllah, she and her husband just said, you know, we're Muslim and nothing you can do is going to stop us from doing that. Like their courage just shot through the roof. And so Umar said in a very somber way, he said, I'm sorry, I just want to know what you were reading. Can you please show me what you were reading? Right now that sincerity is coming out. And Fatima radiallahu anha, she said, no, you're impure because of your misbeliefs and you know what you've been doing. You need to go and purify yourself. So she actually made him go and like take a wudu, like a bath, a shower. And he came back, and that's when, subhanAllah, he was able to read and have his first interaction with the Quran. Surah Taha, where Allah Ta'ala says, مَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لِتَشْقَى, that we never sent this Quran down to make things difficult for you. And look at Umar, man, like he thought the Quran, Islam was making life so difficult, and Allah Ta'ala answers that question. So he, at that moment, Islam breaks into his heart, and he says that he wants to go and meet the Prophet ﷺ. He says he wants to go and meet the Prophet ﷺ, and he goes, this speech is so beautiful, I want to go meet the Messenger of God. At that moment, Khattab, the teacher, jumps out of the closet he was hiding in, and he says, Allahu Akbar. He's like super excited, and he says, I heard last night the Prophet ﷺ making dua that Allah guide you. And like this story gives me goosebumps, man. He said, I heard last night that the Prophet ﷺ making dua that Allah guide you. And when I read this hadith over and over again, I wonder to myself, subhanAllah, like how many people are making dua for us to have a change of heart? How many of our parents are like sitting there crying and begging Allah, oh Allah, like guide my children? Or like how many spouses are praying for their spouses, or siblings are praying for their siblings, or whatever. And they're just begging Allah, like, oh Allah, give my beloved friend or family member, give them hidayah, like put hidayah in their heart and get them away from the lifestyle that they're in and change them and make them better. And they're asking Allah, and like there's that moment, that change of heart that has to happen. And when that dua is accepted, it'll like wash over a person and completely change them. So Khattab, he says to Umar, like, I heard the Prophet ﷺ make dua for you and it's happening. He was like floored. He was shocked that it was happening before his eyes. So he guided him to the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and when Umar shows up, now remember, word has gotten back to the Prophet ﷺ that Umar had his sword around his neck and he was ready to go take care of business. So when Umar shows up at the door, Hamza radiallahu anha and the other companions are there, and when they say Umar bin Khattab is here, remember Umar is still an enemy of Islam at this point on the outside, they say, what should we do? And the Prophet ﷺ says, let him in. And Hamza says, radiallahu anhu, he says, let him in. If he comes in and if he wants to fight, I'll fight him with his own sword. I'll kill him with his own sword. So he enters, and Umar comes in, and the Prophet ﷺ, he gets up and he kind of like very strongly holds him by his chest. And Umar was a big dude, so the Prophet ﷺ gets up and he holds him by his chest. He said, Umar, he said, Ya Umar, isn't it time that you've accepted Islam? Like, isn't it time for you to accept Islam now? What are you waiting for? And Umar says, yes, I'm here to do exactly that. And that was the moment when the takbir, Allahu Akbar, was heard throughout the city of Mecca, because the Muslims were so overwhelmed that such an unlikely character, such an unlikely figure, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened his heart up to Islam. But there was a long journey there, from where he was to where he became, and who he was and who he became. You see, subhanAllah, all these moments. But the important part was, number one, he never ever completely extinguished the potential that he had. Number two, he had that moment, and subhanAllah, we all are going to have that moment in our life. He had that moment where he did something so heinous by striking his sister in the face, that when he saw the effect of who he had become, it opened his heart and it completely changed him. And the third thing was, the Prophet ﷺ was making dua for him. So how many people are watching these videos now, and there are people who are making dua for us to change, and it's just a matter of us getting up and deciding, just like Umar got up and decided, it's time for me to accept. How many of us are at that moment where it's time for us to accept? We ask Allah Ta'ala to give us that courage and that realization. Inshallah, I'll see everyone tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.